Folks, it's nothing like the summer camp that you were used to as a child. It's hard, it's taxing, it's grueling, it's brutal. Or maybe it was like your summer camp. I don't know what your experience was. But hey, this is important, is to get it right and toughen up and get this team prepared for a championship run, because those are the expectations from what I hear. Welcome into Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by as always. Comments, questions are welcome. Super chats available for all of you as well. If you'd like to contribute to the show as well, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App are also effective ways to do that. Just let us know that it's for the Buckeyes show. This guy next to me is Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Huddle. Also, Buckeye Weekly's the podcast. Tony, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. You're talking about summer camp, and I'm reminded that as a kid, we went to a school district where in like the 5th grade or 6th grade, you got to go to a summer camp. And we moved out of that district before I ever got to do that. So it was one of my things I always wanted to do as a kid. And when the place we moved to, you had to join 4-H to go to this camp. So I joined 4-H for a couple of weeks, but it just I'm not the farming type, and so it did not stick.
I didn't know what 4-H was until I got out of college, got my first job in the business in Ashland, Ohio at WNCO. And there was all these 4-H clubs and 4-H this and 4-H that. I had no idea what it was. Never heard of it.
I went to a couple of meetings, and I was scared to death they were going to call on me to talk about my project, which I had not yet begun. So I just stopped going.
Yes, the recollection of summer camp for me, there were good ones and there were not so good ones. There would be the ones I would go to where it seemed like all the other kids knew each other and they already had their cliques, and my mom just kind of dumped me over here because she heard this would be good for you. You go here, but I didn't know anyone, and but then there were other years that I had a great time and whatever. I do recall more recently taking my kids to summer camp. And it was, something that they hated and dreaded. And it was like this summer camp to let me sleep after overnight shifts at ESPN, at least for the morning. And they would just lock these kids up in like a half gymnasium where it was like 97 degrees and humid, and have them play like dodgeball and kickball. And they were like, I took them out after a few days.
That sounds more like Scared Straight than a summer camp. I'm just gonna be honest.
It wasn't too productive. Steve's trying to join us. Hopefully he'll be able to make it on board. Tony, what do you look forward to when you get to go out to practice? I know it's going to be hot and it's going to be a bit miserable at times, but in terms of getting to see these players up close and personal, I got to think that there's been a trend through the years in regards to things that you've looked forward to seeing firsthand.
We'll be there Thursday and Friday. We won't be at the Saturday and Sunday practices, but what I look forward to initially is just getting a baseline for where everybody is, where everybody's lining up, who's lining up where, in terms of the very most basic of depth charts. But then you're also wanting to see which young guys start making plays, or any guys are making plays and standing out, and you take notice of. And as you're taking notes after the entire practice, you'll go through and it's like, well, I have Davis and Igbinosun written down 6 times and things like that of who stood out. And then you go again tomorrow and see if this similar things happen. What I really like is going the first day and then going again like a week or two later to see now where is everybody lining up, because I've got my baseline. Now I want to see who has made a move. And because we may see 4 practices in fall camp, and 2 of them are the first 2 days, and there's no pads, nothing like that. So it's really for a baseline to see where guys are. You get some initial information about who's repping. Is Will Howard going first, Devin Brown going second, but they're going to be going at the same time on 2 fields. So everything's going to be split up pretty evenly initially. But it's the later practices where you can see movement that has been made. But again, there's always, anytime you're getting an opportunity to watch teams that have talent like Ohio State, somebody's going to stand out. We saw that with Jeremiah Smith in the spring. Every time we get to go watch him, something would happen. And so it creates these expectations of more of that. And I'm sure we'll see a little bit of that this week. I'm expecting pretty basic practice, but at this time, just getting information is good, and then applying it to later information is, I think the worth of these first two practices.
Steve's here. Steve, what's going on?
Not much. I knew all about the show. I even promoted the show on Twitter and on our message board. But for some reason, I was looking at our message group where you send it, and I wasn't seeing the StreamYard link. But I finally found it, and I overlooked it like 4 times. Like I looked at it, and I couldn't believe. Is this really it? Well, yeah, that's really it. So yeah, I'm here, tardy, but I don't want to go to detention or anything like that. So, whatever. So,
well, Tony says camp's starting tomorrow, and so I guess you've done this a few times yourself, Steve.
Well, yeah, this will be my 30th season covering Ohio State football full time, and even did a few years part time prior to that. So I've been a fixture over there since the late 80s, and it'll be a little bit different here the first 4 practices because they've sold up to 750 tickets to fans at $50 and up. I think there were some higher price points to have a little bit more access and maybe press some flesh with the guys, when it's over. But I'm sure the players will be interacting quite a bit with the fans once practice is over. But yeah, it's going to be, we'll be there the first 2 days. I understand, I guess we're able to watch all of the first 2 days, but as Tony said, I came in during his remarks, it's kind of hard to learn a whole lot. First of all, they're just going to be in helmets, jerseys, and shorts. So it's not really actual football. It's just kind of getting used to being back on the practice field. And this is what practice will look like or seem like, or the timing of it once we are in full pads. And boy, that's when the drudgery really begins, when you're running around into one another by accident or by happenstance. And so that's when the rubber starts to hit the road and the coaches start to formulate those opinions on this is a guy that we're going to start, and this is a guy that's in the 2 deep, and this is what the special teams will look like and all that. So it's coming tomorrow, whether we're ready for it or not. Summer's over, and it's time to get to work. So here we go.
So this is what I've got to think is the most fascinating portion of this, and this is something nobody else gets to see except you guys and some other VIPs. Would be Ohio State goes out there with arguably the best running back group in the country, the best wide receivers, et cetera, down the line. And they're beating up on 8 or 9 opponents. And then they play 2 or 3 tough games. And then they get to match up against talent on the other side. Obviously, every team has their star or 2 or 5 to match up against Ohio State, but by and large can't. The fascination would be seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. taking on Denzel Burke and seeing the stars on one team and see who the true alpha dogs are when those guys match up along the lines, especially because it's easy to, along the lines is obviously extremely important. But for me, I think it's just easy to differentiate wide receiver, corner. Let's watch these two go at it. They're all Americans. How good are, it's almost like Jerry Rice and Deion Sanders when they would play in the playoffs for the Cowboys and Niners, and the fascination of these guys are the 2 best at what they do. Oh, this is going to be ridiculous to watch them go at each other.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that. And I think in the spring, we got a little bit of a taste of that. Jeremiah Smith, the outstanding freshman, was coming in and he was repping against Denzel Burke. And there was one play maybe at the student appreciation practice where he outleaped Denzel Burke. Burke kind of bounced off of him, and then Smith turned and ran the last 30 yards for like a 60-yard touchdown. I mean, that's a spectacular 1-versus-1 type play that you just don't get to see very often. And Denzel Burke kind of downplayed it. He's like, oh, you guys want to make a big deal about that one play. You don't talk about the 5 where he didn't do anything against me. And, and I understand that. I mean, players have to have their defense mechanism up to defend their turf and that type of thing. But, he's a great player in his own right, certainly Burke. So you make a great point that those are the reps that are most useful, I think, for coaches and observers to see who can really do it when the light is shining the brightest and when it is the best on one side against the best on the other. I sent a note in for our site today about Jack Sawyer talking about Josh Simmons. And in that same vein, Josh Simmons, the left tackle, he described him as an athletic freak. He said that his feet are as good as just about anybody he's ever practiced or played against. He said maybe the one guy who was in the same vein that he was in terms of his nimble feet as an offensive lineman was Paris Johnson, who was the 7th overall pick by the Arizona Cardinals in the 2023 draft. So that's pretty high praise. And again, that just comes from those guys, going head to head so much that they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I take that as a good sign. If Jack Sawyer believes that Josh Simmons is that good potentially, and he also made some comments about Carson Hinsman as one of the hardest working guys on the team, and that Ryan Day said that the right tackle, whose name is now escaping me,
Josh Fryer.
Josh Fryer had as good an offseason as anybody. If those 3 guys are, all playing their best football, and then you have Seth McLaughlin, who's pretty good coming from Alabama, and Donovan Jackson, who may be the best lineman on the team. That tells me the offensive line could go from being a weakness to a strength on this team almost overnight, which, if that's the last weakness that they've got to knock out, that's pretty good. So, yeah, coming all the way back to your thought of, the best against the best, they'll have that and they'll do that. I don't know that we're going to get to see that here in this first 3 or 4 days, though.
It is always interesting to watch the one-on-ones with the receivers and the corners, and we'll all take notes, and I'm jotting down 4 versus 7, the win goes to 4, from 10 in terms of like who the receiver was, who was the quarterback was who threw the ball, just so I can, jot that down, have it, put it in a notebook or whatever, and just have an idea of who's winning a bunch, who's not winning, and who's making the throws. And it is fascinating. That's when everybody pretty much just stops and watches that, provided you can see over the crowd in front of you, which isn't always easy to do. But yeah, those are the fun ones, and those get a little ramped up. And we may see some of that this week. I think we probably will. But again, as Steve said, there's no pads or anything like that, so it's very, very basic. But this is a veteran team, so I think they'll be able to move along quicker in terms of what they're doing. But you can only do so much without pads and your installation and all of that stuff. So it's still very basic. And as Dave said last week, the quarterback situation is going to be split all over the fields the first 4 days. So they're all going to be throwing the ball. They're all going to be split pretty evenly, and just trying to get as much work as they can so they can start paring things down after that. But it's always fun watching the one-on-ones, and you get over and watch the linemen go at it as well, and the hand fighting that goes in there. But the star of the show is always the passing game.
Steve, Tony and I were talking before we started to record here that typically there's a handful of players, if we were talking about just about any other team in the country, where we'd be talking about, okay, the prized freshman from the previous class who sat behind 3 experienced players and really didn't do much. Now let's watch him ascend and see if he can break through, or, various categories of players that, okay, can this guy break through? Can that guy break through? There's a need at this position. Somebody's got to break through. But this team is almost void of that category of player. It would certainly help from a depth situation to see some guys break through. So Tony, it sounds like you've got a couple of names gathered up possibly.
Well, and Steve mentioned one. I think Josh Simmons is a guy that Ryan Day has raved about in terms of the athleticism. And last year was his first year playing left tackle. He was a right tackle before that. That was his first year of doing that at not just that position, but at this level. And he got better as the year went on. Has all the athleticism tools that you want. So I kind of expect him to excel this year. And I think, and I wrote about it a few weeks back, I expect this to be a Joe Moore finalist offensive line for the Buckeyes. So, really you can throw in pretty much everybody from that offensive line as risers, even though they are all starters. I think there is also criticism of some of the starters at Ohio State, whether it is like a G. Scott, who's going to be a starter. There's plenty of criticism directed his way. There's concern about what he can do. We've seen Lathan Ransom have his ups and downs at Ohio State. I expect him to be very, very, very good. But I think maybe a guy that we aren't talking about as much, and I think the coaches are completely confident in, is Cody Simon at middle linebacker. He's going to be the leader of the defense. He's got experience starting at middle linebacker. He was there before Tommy I think he was there, and then Tommy Eichenberg took over, and Cody Simon played for a year, I think in 2021 or 2022 with a bum shoulder and was still playing. So he's got that experience. He understands the defense. He knows it. And this is year 3 of the defense. So you're going to have a lot of guys playing very, very well. I would love to see Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry step up as the backups at defensive end so that they can have a rotation. And if those two guys can step up and you have a full rotation at defensive end, I think that would be great for down the line, down the season. But, offensively, in terms of guys that are going to step up or, the unknowns, I'd say keep an eye out on James Peoples, who is not going to have a ton of reps in the first half, but could be the guy that closes games out in the blowouts and could have a pretty good year. And then don't forget about Brandon Ennis, who was the number 1 receiver in the 2023 class, redshirted last year, or whether he redshirted or not, it doesn't really matter. He's not going to be here for 5 years anyway. So he's a guy that will be able to step in for Emeka Egbuka in the slot, can do some things. I wouldn't be shocked if he's on special teams, maybe in terms of a punt return or something like that, to get him involved more. Ryan Day even mentioned him as a possibility as a running back should things go really, really bad for them in that way. He played a quarterback his senior year at American Heritage because there was an injury there. So he's comfortable running between the tackles. He's 5'11", probably like 205. So he's built like a running back kind of anyway. And I think there's a lot of different things you can do with him.
I'm going to bring up a name that on the surface doesn't seem like it would be anywhere close to that category. But what about Will Howard in this way? Okay, the initial thought, and I'll put myself in this category as well, of just thinking Will Howard's Will Howard. He's played 2.5 years. He's not going to get any better. He is who he is. So he's only going to get better statistically by the exceptional players around him. However, it's not like he's Tom Brady. He's not been playing forever. And even, I've heard Tom Brady talk about how his arm strength improved throughout his NFL career after rep and learning more. Will they take a Will Howard and break down his footwork, his game to make him an even better player and not just say, hey, he's got 2.5 years experience. He just needs to run the offense and be the same Will Howard here as he was at Kansas State. He'll just have better stats.
Yeah, you make a great point there. I think that he still has a lot of proving to do to the coaches and to his teammates. I think there was a time Denzel Burke was quoted at one point saying that he just hadn't seen Will Howard turn it loose yet. And a lot of that could have been due to the spottiness of the pass protection or, again, not having all of his receivers. Emeka Egbuka was still a little bit gimpy in the spring, coming back from injury. And so was Brandon Ennis. So those two of the top 4 receivers weren't there. At the same time, I think we did see some good things out of a couple of the younger guys. like Kojo Antwi and Bryson Rogers. I think they did some good things, I thought, in the spring to maybe earn some reps in preseason camp, maybe even some playing time in the fall. But it's time for the receivers to come on. Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis need to make a quantum leap from last year, where they were just kind of, on the periphery of what was going on, as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Fleming and Agbuka did all the heavy lifting. Well, it's their time to take the star turn and really up. And if that happens, then that should really help Howard and Brown and the quarterbacks to get the job done. So I think Howard does have a lot to prove still. I think it's his job, and it would be very difficult to unseat him. But at the same time, I think that confidence in what everybody believes in him, I think he needs to go out and show it. He needs to go out and earn it. And that starts, tomorrow's first practice. He's got to go out and he's got to own it. And I think that's what Ryan Day wants to see out of Will Howard. I'm sure they're challenging him. Hey, man, take control of this thing. Go get it. Go grab the brass ring. And that's really what they need to see out of him.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Like, we have not been able to see what he can do at his best because he's had Kansas State's talent around him. So I think he's been challenged by what he has at Ohio State. But from talking to people, he's answered the challenge over the summer. In the winter and the spring, he's learning the offense, getting a feel for it. Now he has a better understanding of it, and then a better understanding of who he's throwing the ball to. I go back to Ryan Day with Justin Fields, Tate Martell, how the standard back then was that it takes a year to learn the offense. And that's one of the reasons Tate Martell was so confident that Justin Fields was not going to be able to handle it. And of course, Fields comes in and is the de facto starter immediately. But that was also because there was nobody really. I mean, he was competing with Matthew Baldwin at that time. So this is a much stiffer competition for Will Howard, but the experience that he has is irreplaceable. And if Devin Brown and Will Howard play grade out the same in fall camp, they're going to go with the guy with more experience because you have more information. That gives you more information. You saw how well he played against Texas down the stretch, nearly, beating the Longhorns, and he's won a conference championship. So these are things that he has done that Devin Brown hasn't. So that is information. So it's kind of like, how the contender has to beat the champion. You have to legitimately beat the champion. I think Devin Brown has to legitimately beat out Will Howard, and I don't know how many people expect that.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense, especially with this team. Yakov, appreciate you being here. Yakov is asking about the tight end Will Kesmerick. Reminds me of Mark Bavaro and Brent Jones. Yakov always going to the distant past. He knows I appreciate that.
Reminds me of a rough and tumble Ozzie Newsome, or perhaps a Rodney Holman, or No, I what I was told when he first got there is they loved his physicality, but also it's a huge step up from Ohio to Ohio State. We saw that in the spring. There's a learning curve there, so he's another one. I'm interested to see how he does in fall camp because it was going to be a learning curve. How straight is he now on that curve? How are things going for him? But they brought him into play, and it's just a matter of can he keep up and stay up to speed at Ohio State, because he's a big dude. He's like 6'6", 250, 260, and they need size. They need experience. He's got double-digit starts in his career. But the tight end position is a concern because there are a bunch of question marks there, and they've got a bunch of guys, but I don't know how many guys they can play. And when one of the guys that is going to play is a walk-on in Patrick Gerd, that's you just it begs the question of how good are you at that position?
Jordan Kepler, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Thank you so much for the contribution. Jordan asks, if Ryan Day keeps naming guys that can play running back, how long till he names Kevin Noon? Well,
Steve.
Oh, that could be a while. I don't know.
I will say, I'll just say,
if it comes down to that, they're in trouble.
Kevin is a guy. He's jittery. He's on his toes. He does not drive with the cruise control, so he's alert. He's he can make guys miss. So I think maybe 7 or 8 more, and then we'll see. I'm not sure if he has any eligibility left, though. He's probably ineligible for a lot of things.
I wasn't going running back for Kevin, but if that's what Jordan brings up, hey, who am I to question that? All right. We do appreciate that, folks. We want to tell you about our sponsor as well, folks. You're serious about football, you should be serious about your health, serious about your fitness. And therefore, we present to you Chris Gates' fitness program and his new program that's hitting the market right now, Training Camp. And basically, this is just a health and fitness goal that you can put in front of you and stay consistent, because Chris is a coach himself. So he's been coaching people for years. He's a massive football fan. Hey, that can't hurt. He's created a community in Training Camp that blends fitness and sports together to help you achieve your goals while connecting with a community of sports fans doing the same thing. So if you struggled to stay consistent in the past, and who hasn't, maybe you're confused because you don't know what exercises work and what combination and which ones I should do, how many times a week. He's got all that covered. Training Camp is here to help. You get the top-notch coaching from Chris. He shows you how to do the exercises. It's not the same workout every day. You get a specialized training regimen for a different workout every day. Takes the guesswork out of it, takes the confusion out of it. And then again, the community. You can lean on people. You can get encouragement. They'll kick you right in the butt if you need that. You can participate in challenges, win prizes, and more. Training Camp is centered around sustainable results, no crash diets, extreme routines. Hey, you're a football fan. You want to drink beer. You want to tailgate. Hey, you can do that too and still see progress. And it's basically your weekly coffee run. In fact, the first month is a massive discount. Sign up this week. You can get your first month at just $10. That's 80% off the monthly price. So once again, it is Chris Gates' fitness program, Training Camp, and you get the link down in the description section of our video right here. All right. Yes, Jackson, thank you for the reminder. Use the code VOICE. We're extending to next week because I told Chris, hey, let's get you in front of some new audiences. So we'll do you a bonus on the various team channels and the team shows as well. Tony, what's going on at Buckeye Huddle and the Buckeye Weekly Podcast?
We will, I'm not sure if we're going to do a preview, but we'll be doing a recap from camp tomorrow for sure. Probably a live show that sometime lunchtime-ish after we talk with Day, watch practice, talk with Day. We'll probably do something live after that. And in terms of Buckeye Huddle, I'm wrapping up, finally got done at all of these, the closer look pieces I've done with all of the incoming freshmen and transfers. I'll finish up with Aaron Scott today. So you can check that out at buckeyehuddle.com and check all of those out there. Just clips from spring games and then high school and things of that nature to get an idea of what to expect from all of these incoming freshmen and transfers.
Steve, what's working this week for you?
Just trying to get ready, talking about, getting your notebooks ready and getting everything squared away, rosters and uniform numbers, and trying to understand what freshmen are, who do we need to get pictures of. And we're going to have pictures and videos, and Ryan Day on Thursday and Jim Knowles on Friday. They're going to speak this week, and practice reports and all kinds of coverage of what's going to happen here as the season begins, at least the preseason camp begins. And there's just so much going on around Ohio State, and you can never expect to stay on top of all of it, but we're doing our level best over at Bucknuts. And, Bill Kurlick is still tracking down all the recruiting aspects of this as well. And, with the roster size, the scholarships going to 105 as proposed for the 2025-26 school year, it does kind of come into focus how I wouldn't say that Ohio State has taken some middle of the road type players, but they are loading up on some what I would consider depth pieces in this 2025 class. I mean, it's the number one class, but it's also got a few guys who have committed recently who are a little farther down the line in the national rankings. And I love, Ben Buckeye fan from Bexley who chimes in, goes, "It's great we took this kid, but screws up our ranking." It's like, Jesus criminy, people. He's a human being. Don't just reduce him to his recruiting ranking and say he has no worth. So, but that's the world we live in with these folks. So, any rate, it to me, I think they probably are going to take 30 or 35 players if they're able to help fill out that roster. And then I think they've got to go into the transfer portal after the season. When you're going to be like Michigan a year from now, not a cheater, but only having 5 starters coming back off the previous year, you're going to have to go hard into the transfer portal to get veterans who can come in and help you win right away. So that's if there was ever a year where the roster could go from 85 to 105 with scholarships, I'd say for Ohio State, this is a good year for it.
Well, Ryan Day even talked about it at media days about how they are taking more 3-star guys, and he's not saying that, but developmental players. But it's because of NIL, where you can't pay everybody like they're top 200 players. So you don't have the salary cap basically, so you have to go and get some developmental guys that aren't asking for $120,000 who will take the scholarship and will spend a couple of years developing. And do those have to be mostly Ohio kids? Maybe, but you're going to see more and more of that with the expansion to a 105. And I'm expecting a class of like 28 before anything shifts. And I just wonder, what is the first? And this is something I wanted to ask Ryan Day. Like, what is that first full recruiting class going to look like in the 105? Is it, because it doesn't seem like, I don't know if it's going to be this class, as Steve is alluding to. Like, I don't know how much of it is going to be this class, or how much is it going to be next class, and how much of these new 20 spots do they want to be on average high school versus transfer portals? Because you still have to build the culture, keep the culture, and you can't bring in necessarily 15 new players from other colleges that you've vetted as best you can in the span of 4 days, basically, because you have no time in the portal. Everything has moved so fast. So they're still going to want to bring in mostly high school kids, but with the freedom of movement, you're always going to have pits in your roster that you can fill through the portal. I just wonder what that first recruiting class is going to look like when they're at 105, when they have the ability. I assume it's going to be the largest class in Ohio State history since the Woody Hayes days, since they put in restrictions. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they have like a class of 35 or 40 in the next 2 years or so.
And to answer Brian Bexley from Brecksville, or whomever he is, in theory, that talks about weighing down the recruiting rankings. I think if we went through the last 10 or 15 years of recruiting rankings and went through every class and went through those players who weighted down the overall ranking, I think we would have a pretty good list of players, I think.
Well, just go look at the, and I can maybe bring it up here, the 2012 Ohio State recruiting class, or the 2012 Ohio State recruiting class, where, and I'll just bring up the 24/7. And this was a class that mostly Urban Meyer was saddled with, but you would call it more gifted with after the fact, when you got Pat Elfline, Michael Thomas returning from Fork Union. He was not highly rated. Jacoby Boren, not highly rated. Tyvis Powell, not highly rated. Cardale Jones was coming back from Fork Union as well. So there are some guys that probably wouldn't have had offers from Ohio State that Urban Meyer stuck with because they were committed. And you're going to have that in most classes if you just scroll to the bottom of it. And it's always fascinating because Georgia has guys that are, bottom of the barrel as well, because you have to fill out your class, but also because you trust your scouting. And you don't recruit necessarily off of scouting, off of internet sites. You recruit off of, your own, what you've seen, and your own scouting department, because those are the guys that you trust, that you're there with every day, that have a track record. So there's going to be guys that are in state that you can get, and you feel like, well, we can develop them. Some years, some guys wouldn't get an offer. Some years they would because of desperation or lack of numbers. So every year is fluid, but every year you're going to find guys towards the bottom of the class that that pan out much better. Like Kyle Dotson, you're looking right there. That was a huge get for Urban Meyer. That was a late get, committed to Ohio State over, I think, Wisconsin on signing day. It's still legendary, and he never played. Savon Pittman, a huge get from Michigan State, and never played. Tommy Shutt, 5-star defensive tackle who played quite a bit but never lived up to his 5-star defensive tackle. These are all guys that Urban Meyer came in and landed after he got here. And Noah Spence being another one of those guys, I think in the 2013 class, maybe the 2012 class. Very, very good, but did not stay a Buckeye for long. And so, Armani Reeves, another one, Cameron Williams, stole them from Penn State, really never panned out. Briante down, another one from there, all towards the top of the class. So there's a reason why this is not a science, and it's mostly guesswork. And the NFL is still 50% on drafting quarterbacks in the first round, because there's no such thing as a sure thing other than Jeremiah Smith.
Taylor Decker did not have a national rank in this class.
These are faulty rankings somewhat, because he was like a 4-star guy, but he may not have been in like the top 250. And
I think some of the old rankings have been scrubbed from the site for some reason. I can't, because I went back to look at some stuff. Speaking of Taylor Decker, he's a $20 million a year offensive lineman in the National Football League. Congratulations to him. Goodness gracious.
A guy that Ohio State had to offer after Urban Meyer came in with Ed Warner, because they didn't offer him before that. They didn't think he was good enough at that point.
Outside of Adolphus Washington, the top of the class might as well have been the bottom of the class. Look at the first 6 players. Interesting.
And a trivia note, Devin Bogard, the first Ohio State Buckeye to ever lose his black stripe.
Oh,
wow. That's amazing.
You never cease to amaze me, Tony.
The more you know.
The more you know.
Steve brought up the M word, and there was some news surrounding our friends from up north this week. One had to do with the penalty that was already enforced at the beginning of last season for Jim Harbaugh and the recruiting violations, but there was a further explanation that I saw, a detailed list. I didn't read it verbatim, every word, on 247 Sports about the process of the investigation, what was discovered, and why Harbaugh was fined or suspended for the 3 games. What is more important and more interesting to everyone is, of course, going forward with the Connor Stallions investigation, and it being leaked this week that there is an indication that there would be a postseason ban in the future for Michigan. They will challenge that ban. That's being reported, a 1 to 2 year ban. Therefore, by the time the infractions committee gets a hold of it, it would not affect the 2024 season, certainly. And so what do you guys think about the latest concerning our Michigan friends?
I'll let Steve go.
Well, it's just wait and see at this point. I mean, I think it's just, you just have to kind of accept that, I mean, I don't understand why it's taken 9 months and we're still at this point where you're waiting for some kind of resolution. I would think that something should be resolved on this, anytime. And I love Chris Ballas from the Wolverine, the Rivals site, I think, or maybe it's the On3 site there now. He's like, the notice of allegations is coming and Michigan is ready to fight, ready to fight. It's like me, when I live east of Columbus off I-70. So when I have to go to Columbus for interviews, it's about a 35 minute drive. And when I go down my road and get on I-70, it's 70 miles per hour, but nobody out here goes 70 miles per hour. Once you're outside like 256 exit, it's like the Autobahn. You can, pretty much go as fast as you want. So if I set my cruise at 83 miles per hour and the cop sitting there at the 310 exit gets me going by at 83 miles per hour and pulls me over, I really don't have a leg to stand on. I went 83 miles per hour. It's kind of prima facie, or whatever that Latin term is. It's like, these are the facts and this is the penalty for what you did. And there's no disputing the fact that that's what you did. Well, the same thing applies here with these guys. There's just no disputing what they did. It's the open and shut case. It's just how big of a book does the NCAA want to throw at Michigan? Do they really want to cripple the program, or do they really just want to say, oh, boys will be boys. Use technology to beat people. Wow. Great job by you. Don't do it again. Don't anybody else try it. I mean, if they don't throw the book at them, then it's kind of like you do whatever you like. It should be a free for all. So who knows? And, it's going to be, we've talked about it for months. We'll see what happens when the day comes.
I think it's interesting that I think at this point, Central Michigan has fired as many people as Michigan has for being involved in this. In terms of the assistant coaches, the report coming out that Central Michigan has let go their quarterbacks coach, who was a student assistant under Jim Harbaugh at Michigan years ago. And, so there's some interesting tie-ins there. But in terms of Michigan fighting whatever gets handed down, they have said they're going to fight every step of the way last year. And then every time it came to fighting, they backed down. Remember the temporary restraining order to get Jim Harbaugh coaching against Penn State or whatever, they backed down. Once the evidence is presented to them, they stop fighting. And
yeah,
they put up the fight until the evidence is put forth. They put up the fight while there's an investigation going on. They do not put up a fight once the evidence is provided to them. So, I still believe if they start out 3-2 this season, they're going to self-impose a postseason ban. That way they can just try to get ahead of this. You lose to Texas. If you lose to USC at home, you're kind of like, you know what? Let's be the bigger men here. Let's be Michigan men. Let's take the higher road. But in terms of, I know there are already penalties being talked about. That's not going to be part of the notice of allegations. You can make assumptions based on precedents and what those allegations are, what they have led to in the past. So what will happen is if these notice of allegations do come out this week, Michigan has 90 days to respond, and then the NCAA has 90 days to respond. And then if there is any other kind of litigation or whatever, but Michigan, they're not going to open themselves to, I don't think, any type of legal court thing, because right now coaches aren't cooperating that are no longer there. And if you start opening it up to legal stuff, then they might have to, and then you might really get into trouble. So I think you try to, if they can get there 1 year, then do it. But I think the NCAA has come out and said that they don't really want to be as harsh as they have been in the past, but they gave Michigan 3 years for something that is much less serious than what is happening for the past 3 years. So they're not gonna give them concurrent sentences. They're not gonna be like, oh, you get 3 years for this year and 3 years for this year, so you can serve them all at the same time. These will probably be consecutive penalties, and I don't know what they'll be, but it's not. It used to be, and you guys remember this. It used to be like probation was the big penalty, and vacating wins was like, that's nothing. Now it's like, because Michigan has a national championship, everybody wants the vacated wins, and the probation is nothing. And I think the interesting thing about scholarship reductions, it used to be like 5 would be a significant reduction with 85 players. What is the equivalent to that now with a roster of 105? what used to be 5, does it need to be 15 now? And is that too much? So I think there's some interesting things there that we have to consider as well.
Yeah, I thought was really kind of interesting is underneath the tweets by Chris Ballas, the Michigan people, were kind of skeptical, and one of them even blurted out, "Well, I hope the attorneys we get to fight this are better than the ones we had in November." So, it's even they have realism to know that something's coming. We just don't know what.
I mean, Jim Harbaugh wanted to fight 2 suspensions and ended up not fighting them. So, like, once the evidence gets presented, I mean, it's hard to argue with that.
The NCAA has forced vacated wins in the past in situations that did not affect, they were rules violations, but they did not directly impact the games on the field. And they forced those vacated situations, Penn State and Jerry Sandusky being the most egregious criminal act pretty much that we can think of. But what did that have to do with the play on the field? Zero. Why are you vacating wins? I went on a tirade about that yesterday. And then the Ohio State situation in 2010. This seems to be exactly the case in which the cheating was direct to the field performance. This is all about vacating wins.
Yep.
Yeah.
Should be.
And what is the level of quote unquote cheating or evidence that is needed? Is it every ticket for a game that was bought, like for an opponent, or is it just the games where it's that the biggest game? So I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but if it's using an illegal player or using an illegal coach, is it anything they're involved in? They're done with. So that's another thing where they have to figure out what exactly do we want to do here? How much do we want to do? How much harm do you want to bring? And how annoyed have you been at Michigan through this whole thing and the previous thing? Like they've been dragging their feet on both things. I've seen Michigan fans talking about how the NCAA can't do anything about the CFP moving forward. Like that's a totally separate entity. But I will read from you one of the teleconferences last year when, if we remember, James Madison, Jacksonville State weren't able to be ranked in the college football playoff rankings because they were in a transition period. And so the question was, there's reports and rumors that the NCAA could waive that transition period and make them eligible to be part of the rankings. And the answer from Bill Hancock regarding all of this ties into what we're talking about here. They said the committee is instructed to rank the teams that are eligible without any conditions to compete in bowl games. The logic, frankly, is to not leave out other teams that are eligible regarding the rankings. The purpose of the rankings is to identify teams that are definitely able to play in the postseason. So that's the logic. So if the NCAA says you are not eligible to play in the postseason, the College Football Playoff Committee will not be talking about them.
Makes sense.
And not ranking them.
There you go.
It should make sense, you mean, Steve?
It should.
It should.
It should.
Yeah. If we put those two things together, that was a good blurb there, Tony. There's the act of cheating, and then there is the estimated impact of the cheating, which, based on everything I saw from former players, current coaches, all of that, NFL and collegiate included, ranged all over the map. Nobody could agree on the impact. It went all the way from it doesn't matter to absolutely this matters. This, and the breakdown of how it would play out and the advantage you would have. So that surprised me that there couldn't be a stronger consensus on how much this impacts on the field. Well, on the other hand, go ahead, Tony.
Well, I'm just going to say, like, there have been games vacated because players played in them when they shouldn't have, regardless of the impact they had in those games. Like the fact that they were on the field is enough to get that game removed. And
then to me, I seem to be in the minority. Let's take the Tom Brady, what did they call that when they pumped up the football? Inflate
Deflategate.
Yeah.
Deflategate.
Do I personally believe that impacted Tom Brady? The guy's thrown for 60,000 yards. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. He's done it a million times. They went out and beat the Colts in the playoffs like 45-7. Do I think that whatever ounce of deflation that he wanted to grip the ball, but do I think that really impacted? No. But why did he do it? And it was done, and it was cheating. Therefore, there has to be some repercussion. There in that case. I don't remember what it was, but you cheat for only one reason. There's only one reason to cheat. And then my last question is, I want to know how much this permeated through the coaching staff. There is no way that Connor Stallions, to me, and I might be wrong, did this as a rogue individual, and this information went no further. Didn't impact anything. Nobody knew about it. The defensive coordinator, the assistant coaches, they had no idea. They didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense.
No, none at all. None at all.
So I think that cheating, it's one thing if your company, whatever the industry, you can't control everyone, but the company has to be accountable. If you've got somebody who did something illegal in a dealing with another company, let's say a client or something, but you knew nothing about it, you still have to take the hit for it. But at least there's an understanding. Okay, the CEO, the rest of the company had no idea that this guy was a rogue guy doing X, Y, and Z. However, if you determine to me, that's a completely other level of penalty if this is known by other defensive coaches and can be proven.
Yeah, and that would be a huge detriment to Michigan's case. But the NCAA also says the head coach doesn't need to know to have known. You should have known, whether you know or not. You should have known, and the head coach is no longer there to punish. So I don't know if it's just like, well, you know what, our job is done here. It would be one thing, and I said it at the time, Michigan should fire Jim Harbaugh. Just as you know he's leaving, fire him. Ohio State fired Jim Tressel, and that kind of that's a pound of flesh that the NCAA no longer needs. And they did not get their pound of flesh from Michigan regarding the head coach.
On a completely different note, let's recognize the super chat coming in from our guy, JR's rankings. I'm going to need therapy if Ohio State misses out on David Sanders because of NIL. Really?
Well, I mean, they need a blue chip tackle, and certainly the left tackle job is going to be open after this coming season. I don't think that David Sanders necessarily, even as a 5-star national top 5 prospect, is going to come in and start day one at offensive tackle at Ohio State. But, by his second year, you'd think, there's a really good chance he could start years 2 or 3 or whatever. So, it's been a long time since they've had a 5-star offensive lineman at Ohio State, me back to Paris Johnson. So, they need one, and Justin Fry needs one, for his recruiting inventory, certainly to show what he's capable of doing in terms of recruiting. People are saying that maybe Tennessee or some other school is making a real inroad for Sanders and, maybe pushing the ante. I don't know, but I think Ohio State's going to do whatever they can to sign him, and people are going to make of it what they will. It's either, they didn't pay for him, or that the kid didn't want to come and play for Justin Fry, who has no, resume as an offensive line coach. So I think that it would behoove Ohio State, and particularly Justin Day, to have a really good year with the offensive line in 2024, because the vagaries of these kids recruiting and different things like that, up, down, side to side, there's very little you can do about it. If you have the same amount of money that you're offering a kid that Tennessee is, or whatever other school is involved, and he goes elsewhere, I mean, what what else can you do? I don't know what else you're supposed to do. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting when that one comes down, because people are going to twist that one and turn that one every which direction to make their case, I guess.
I think Justin Fry needs this one more than Ohio State, and Ohio State needs it. So that
Yeah,
gives
they
you an
both
idea.
need it.
It will be interesting. Just say David Sanders commits to Ohio State tomorrow. How confident are Ohio State fans? How confident would they be that they don't have to worry then the rest of the way out until signing day about keeping him? So I would say the same thing. If he commits somewhere else, there's still a very good possibility, or the very real possibility, that this recruitment is not over, and that at that point, once he commits, now you just know kind of where things stand and where you need to raise things to. And not that this is just a straight NIL thing, but when you are the top left tackle in a recruiting class, NIL is going to be a huge part of it, because it should be, because you have that kind of you have that leverage. And Ohio State has not produced offensive linemen in a way to overtake that leverage. It's not like, Larry Johnson has a history. Brian Hartline has a history. Ryan Day in the quarterback situation, they have a history of producing people at this position. Paris Johnson was going to be a first-round pick wherever he went. And so you've got to show something this season from that offensive line. And they should. Again, like we've said, we expect a very good offensive line. But other schools can say the same thing. And so, Tennessee can show their draft picks on the offensive line. Darnell Wright recently. So they've got that as well. So I think regardless of if he commits somewhere here in the very near future, this is still going to be something that people are vying for. Nobody's going to give up just because he commits somewhere, basically.
Folks, the Amazon link's in the description section of all the videos, so please grab the Amazon link and use it. It doesn't cost you a penny. It's your one way to contribute to the channel and our network of channels and not spend a penny. And it's the same exact shopping experience. Amazon still tracks all of your purchases, and your account is not affected in any way. So please use the Amazon link. Make it on over to BuckeyeHuddle.com. Buckeye Weekly. When does the next Buckeye Weekly drop?
Let's say tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. And of course, Steve's tearing it up at Bucknuts as usual. Catch the rest of the crew there at 247 Sports. Tony, Steve, have a great time at practice this week. It looks like you get out there twice, correct?
Yes, tomorrow and Friday.
Awesome. All right, enjoy, and we'll make it on back here next week.
All right, take care.